your prescription and then you take it away with you. The problem with that, obviously, is that those drugs can then potentially be diverted onto an illicit market.
Of course, it's not just these Class A drugs. We now have this. I'm a member of Parliament, and I'm not entirely sure what the classification of cannabis is anymore. But cannabis, not the 60s cannabis that people tuned in and dropped out on, but the new style, genetically modified, industrialized cannabis is cutting a swathe through the mental health of our young people. Surely the message that the state has to send is that all intoxication is potentially dangerous and certainly harmful to society. And some things are more harmful and more dangerous than others. And these currently illegal drugs are things that the state simply cannot sanctify with the legalization process that you had in mind.
Absolutely, I'd agree with you that it's appropriate for the state to send out messages about the dangers of drugs, to educate young people about risk, and to encourage them to make sensible lifestyle choices. No one is going to dispute that. The question is, how do we do that? And drugs, actually, illegal drugs are unique in social policy in that we use the criminal justice system as a primary tool for educating young people. Now, we don't do that with anything else. We don't do it with diet, we don't do it with sexual health, we don't do it with dangerous sports, we don't do it with anything. Nothing else in the public health arena do we use the full force of criminal law, not civil law, criminal law, to educate and send out the message to young people. It's quite anomalous. It's completely out of sync with all other aspects of public health education. And, more significantly, it's been an abject and total failure. It simply doesn't work.
Well, you see,
it simply doesn't work. Look, drug use has exploded since 1971 and the Misuse of Drugs Act. Drug use has risen exponentially. So where is the evidence that this policy aimed at reducing drug use does that? It clearly doesn't.
Just saying no clearly doesn't work. But it's my view, and it hasn't changed since the last time we argued this, is that that's all really we're doing, is just saying no. And we scoop up hapless victims, and I agree with you, stuff the prisons full of them. Probably 60–70% of the people in prison needn't be there if it were not for the fact that they were
So why are you
on drugs.
Why would you advocate that position?
Here's what I'm saying. I don't believe there is any serious effort being made to interdict the passage of drugs into this country. For example, 60% of the, probably 80% of the heroin coming into this country is coming from the Helmand province, where we and many other countries have thousands of soldiers armed to the teeth. And yet, the supply of heroin from Helmand province is actually increasing. So more dope is coming from Helmand to Glasgow than there was before tens of thousands of Western soldiers arrived there. The Royal Navy is in the Gulf instead of patrolling our shores, stopping drugs arriving. We're sacking customs officers instead of taking on thousands more customs officers, searching fewer people at the ports rather than more people at the ports. And the number of Mr. Biggs who are ever arrested and sent to prison for the rest of their life is negligible. So there is no real war on drugs. There's just a war of words on drugs. That's my view.
Well, actually, billions of pounds of resources are poured into interdiction every year. In the UK, it's in the region of 1 to 3 billion, depending on where you draw your parameters. Globally, it's vast. It's billions and billions, runs into trillions if you look at it on a kind of decade-long basis. And we can see very clearly, even countries that do have maybe the kind of intense interdiction efforts that you're advocating, they don't get the... Look at America. The US has the most ferocious war on drugs. They spend billions on border security. They're bombing the hell out of... They're spraying coca crops in Colombia. They've got, as you say, enormous amounts of troops. It clearly doesn't work. And I think the point that you don't seem to understand is that there are basic economics of unregulated markets here that are impossible to change with enforcement, even hardcore military enforcement. And that basic economics is essentially that there is enormous demand for drugs, and those drugs are prohibited, and in doing that you create a vacuum into which organised crime inevitably move, because an enormous profit opportunity is created. A profit opportunity estimated by the UN to be worth around 300 billion a year. 300 billion.
We're gonna have to leave it there.
Of course the gangsters are going to go there.
Yeah, but then if the gangsters were going down for the rest of their natural in greater numbers than
another
they currently
gangster
are,
comes along.
Well, we'll see. We'll just have to agree to disagree. It's a pleasure, as always, to disagree with you. It's George Galloway. It's the real deal.
Just the way you move, it's a real deal. And the way you groove, it's the way I feel it. You're a wild thing and you're a natural star. Got me crazy about the way you walk. So I like you, baby, you're the real deal.
Now this is On This Day, the spot where I review the famous events that fell in history on this date, August 31st. It'll have to be brief because we have a packed show. Here's a rather grisly start. In 1888, in what is now my constituency in London, Mary Ann Polly Nichols became the first victim of Jack the Ripper. We speculate still on who he was, and every week now hundreds of tourists led by guides tramp round the streets, taking in the spot where Polly and other victims of the Ripper were killed. It's a strange world. In 1969, one of my heroes, Rocky Marciano, the former heavyweight champion of the world, who made a habit of rendering other boxers horizontal, died in an air crash. He won all 49 of his bouts, including 43 knockouts, one of which was Britain's Don Cockell. Also in 1969, one of my heroes returned. Bob Dylan appeared on stage for the first time in 3 years following his motorcycle accident. 3 years later, in 1972, swimmer Mark Spitz wrapped up his Olympics with his 5th gold medal, a record that lasted until just a few days ago when another US swimmer with big ears, Mark Phelps, bagged 8. In 1997, the Diana legend industry had its send-off when the Princess of Wales died in a car crash in Paris. This provoked a quite extraordinary outpouring of public grief and the usual outpouring of gratuitous rubbish from the then Prime Minister, Tony Blair. Now my final guest is the journalist, campaigner and friend Yvonne Ridley, who's not unknown to this station, my fellow presenter, of course. Yvonne was on one of the 2 boats which breached the Israeli blockade of Gaza last week in a brave and daring move to bring relief to the beleaguered Gaza Strip and the world's attention to what can only be described as a latter-day concentration camp. Yvonne Ridley, I hope you're on the telephone. Yvonne, welcome back. Are you back in Britain?
I'm still on the boat. I'm still on the Liberty, and I can see the Cypriot skyline now. We're coming into Cyprus alongside the Free Gaza, and the crews on both boats are absolutely jubilant because we've just heard, although it has yet to be confirmed, that Israel has said it will not stop any boats entering into Gaza on the humanitarian missions.
Well, that would be an achievement indeed. I can almost smell the brine. I can hear the wind in your sails. I have to say, you're fed up hearing this from me. We are all so proud of you. With your courage, with your faith, you stuck with this when many people thought you had no chance at all of getting through the Israeli Navy. How did you manage it?
George, we're still asking the same question, but I'll tell you one thing. When I got into Gaza, everybody said, "Where's George? Where is he?" And I said, "He'll be coming soon, inshallah." So I've committed you to go and sailing into Gaza sometime this year.
I'll definitely do that. But I think you just shamed them, Yvonne. The sincerity of you and your fellow shipmates was such that the Israelis calibrated the damage to their reputation, as if the reputation could be damaged even more, I know. But the damage to their reputation of stopping you was going to be greater than the damage to their position by letting you through.
Well, I mean, there's a lot to be said about Gandhi-style activism, and it certainly worked in this case. You know, they had all the weaponry, all the armour. They tried to cycle